Hi, my name is Steve Eady. I'm with the Sauk Valley Education Forum, Voters Forum, and we're here with Jim Dodge. He is running as a Republican candidate for Comptroller for the state of Illinois.
That's correct.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And he was given a list of questions like all our candidates have, and we're just going to go through the questions and have him answer them. So just to start out, let's just talk about the Illinois budget. And let's talk about what's the Comptroller's job in terms of involvement with the budget.
There's probably two parts to the answer. The first is the Comptroller serves as what we would call the Chief Fiscal Control Officer. So the simplest way to describe that is to say the Comptroller manages the state's $54 billion checkbook. In addition to that, you also are responsible for the auditing and, if you will, the certification of all the revenue coming into the state of Illinois. It's then turned over to the Treasury Department for short-term investment before then the Comptroller's office would write you a check back for a state income tax return, or if you are a small business or a large business doing any work for the state of Illinois, you'd be paid by the Comptroller's office.
Okay.
So it's a Chief Fiscal Control Officer, checkbooks, essentially.
Okay. So is it essentially have control over the entire checkbook, or is that delegated out to various parts of the government that would then?
The majority of the checks, the warrants issued against state of Illinois money, warrants is the technical term from the 1970 Constitution, would come through the Comptroller's office.
Okay.
But for example, if there's a disbursement back from a given agency, the Comptroller would essentially account for it and make sure that it all balances at the end, as would some of the other offices under the governor, but that check may come from an individual agency.
Well, one of the things you can explain to me, and this is, Illinois has been delinquent in paying people for quite some time.
Very delinquent, right?
And I want to understand exactly who's responsible for that, what's the role of the Comptroller in that, and a little bit about what you think would be different if you were elected.
First and foremost, it's a cash flow problem. It is a horrible cash flow problem because structurally, state finances are completely out of whack. They are spending way too much money that they simply don't have, which is what's forced them into this cycle, almost continuous cycle of short-term borrowing in order to keep up with some of the bills. Now, as an aside, I've had a couple of state reps or state legislators say to me that it's not entirely clear all of the money is being paid out as quickly as it could. So the short answer is it's primarily a cash flow problem. And, quite frankly, the Comptroller cannot issue a warrant, a check, if you will, against state accounts if the money's not there.
Correct.
So first and foremost, this is a spending and then a cash flow problem.
Okay. So essentially, it's more of an assembly problem of they are not either raising enough or they're spending too much.
In no uncertain terms, where my head is at is this is a spending problem, not necessarily a revenue problem.
Okay.
They've been out of control for a number of years, and I could give you a chapter and verse. It might be boring as all get out with the details, but
not to go off on the tangent too deeply, but as a Comptroller, what would you like to see different in terms of the fiscal responsibility of the assembly?
Somebody needs to have the business sense, then the discipline to say, stop the madness, right? And that's, I would hope, would be Jim Dodge. You could not do this if you were a family or if you were a business in Illinois, because you'd either be homeless or you'd be bankrupt.
Okay.
So the state should no longer be allowed to live by a separate set of financial rules, which I find very, very frustrating. Quite frankly, there's a moral obligation to serve well if you stand for election. So they seem to have forgotten that in Springfield. So I think the reality here is we have to learn to live within our means, and I think the Comptroller is the right position to be the fiscal voice of sanity down in Springfield. Okay. Now, ultimately, legislature, budgets and appropriates, governor's office is the executional arm that then gets it done.
Right.
But someone has to be the check and balance to say, listen, we don't have this money. We can't keep doing this. And that's what I think has been missing with Dan Hines' office for a number of years.
Okay. Well, let's take that over then to the Treasurer's office, because the Comptroller works with the Treasurer as well. And I know our current administration has done some things that have lost millions of dollars for the state of Illinois. Could you explain that a little bit?
They've given there's actually a fairly lengthy list, but it's very restrictive in terms of what the treasurer can actually invest in. So let's just say that the state of Illinois has $1 billion that it can invest for the space of a month.
Right.
That money almost always flows into various banks around Illinois in highly liquid, highly secure federal instruments like 2-3 day notes, treasuries, et cetera, that sort of thing. The money that was lost was most likely in the college 529 funds.
Okay.
So I think that the loss traces to, quite frankly, poor investment choices,
Okay.
perhaps bad financial management on the firm who was given that contract.
Right.
And then the people left holding the bill will be ultimately the parents and the kids of Illinois who don't have the money they thought they did.
Right.
That's very frustrating.
That is frustrating. How large is the comptroller office?
Total budget is dangerously close to $100 million a year, and the head count is just under 300. So it's a fairly important department. And that's one of the things that I've long said on this position is, I have a set of goals and objectives for the office, which is let's do the job well. Let's bring real transparency, which we can talk about if you'd like. But ultimately, this is a get-it-done constitutional job. My boss, if you will be the people of Illinois, which is, why are you going to send Jim Dodge to Springfield? Well,
Right.
do the job, and oh, by the way, tell us when they're all crazy. Okay, that'll probably start day one.
No, right.
So that I see is the main focus of a nuts and bolts, get it done, be honest, be competent kind of job.
Let's talk about transparency.
Okay.
How are you going to change the way it is done today?
There's two structural problems I see with Illinois politics right now. First is lack of real political fundraising reform. I think the fundraising bill they just passed is, quite frankly, a sham.
Okay.
Because
Okay.
it didn't fix some of the links between contributors and beneficiaries, and we can talk about that in just a second. But in terms of transparency, I'll give you an example. Right now in Illinois, any company that does more than $50,000 worth of business with the state of Illinois must register with the State Board of Elections.
Okay.
That is to make sure that you or I could then be able to see that a given company and its employees contributed to various people involved in the decision-making with
Right.
the awarding of the contracts. So here's the problem. And this is a simple problem to fix, in my opinion, because I have a technology background.
Okay.
If you go to Dan Hines' website right now, and you search for a little-known technology company, and I'm just picking them because everybody knows the name, like IBM,
Yep.
you'd have to do 3 or 4 different searches to get the full answer as to how much the IBM Corporation does business with the state of Illinois. You could search for IBM, you could search for IBM Corporation, or you could search for IBM Business Credit. You'd get 3 different answers. Then, if you flipped over to the State Board of Elections website and you search for this little-known technology company, IBM, you would find that IBM Credit is registered with the State Board of Elections, but not IBM or IBM Corporation, even though the total amount of money might be crowding $28 million a year.
Wow.
So my point is, that's Illinois transparency. We don't have real transparency because you or I, as just 2 average guys hanging out on a Sunday afternoon, we
Right.
couldn't just go dive into one simple, easy-to-use website that says, show me who's contributing to the main decision makers in the state and who they work for, and the data is not tied together.
Simple database management.
It is,
sounds like.
and I've maintained that for months on the campaign trail with the
Yeah.
editorial boards versus one of my opponents who just discovered recently, apparently, the internet. The data, by definition, is there. Every penny the state spends is accounted for, by definition. It is online, but it's painful. It's difficult. It's not well aligned, and if you don't have the secret decoder ring, you're never going to be
Right.
able to stitch the story together. And that is what I mean by when I say we have Illinois transparency, not real transparency. It's one of my passions to try and fix.
Okay, excellent. Well, let's talk a little bit about the budget, because you don't have any control over a lot of the stuff, but again, you have to get a say in it.
Right.
How would you consult the new governor or the new legislature to say these are the things we need to do to get this balance in check? You obviously know this already, that Moody's downgraded
Yep.
Illinois bonds, and now we're the second worst in the nation, only to California. I think it's $11 billion deficit right now that state of Illinois.
And as of today, right.
As
There.
of today, and about $1 billion every year, probably increasing every year from now. But what are some of the things that you would want to do as a controller to say, hey, if I'm going to have a say and have the ear of the governor or have the ear of the legislature, these are the things that we need to do?
I would say we didn't get here in a day. I would say you can probably point to we got here in a decade, the past decade. And so I think what we need to do is decompose the problem into solvable, smaller problems.
Okay.
First and foremost, short term, let's get real with the facts about how much money needs to come in to fund current obligations so we can start to catch up on our bills. And here's why I think this is significant for the people of Illinois.